Mom abandons autistic boy in the savannah, but what a lion did next shocked the world. The scorching heat of the Kenyan savannah stretched for miles, a golden vastness dotted with dry shrubs and solitary acacia trees. A dusty old Toyota Land Cruiser drove slowly across the parched terrain, leaving behind a trail of dust that lingered in the air. Inside, Melissa Parker clutched the steering wheel with trembling hands, occasionally glancing at the rearview mirror where she could see her 7-year-old son Ethan rocking back and forth, lost in his own world. Melissa had once been a renowned wildlife photographer for National Geographic, capturing the beauty of Africa's landscapes and animals. But that was before Ethan was born, before her husband left her, before the diagnosis that changed everything. Autism, the doctors had said, severe autism that required specialized care, therapy and patience, things that Melissa was running out of. The medical bills had piled up and her career had stalled. The trip to Kenya was supposed to be her comeback, a chance to reconnect with her passion and secure a job with a prestigious conservation organization. "Just a little longer, Ethan," she whispered, more to herself than to her son, who continued to stare out the window, fascinated by the patterns of light filtering through the clouds. She pulled over at the edge of a clearing where the savannah opened up into a breathtaking vista, perfect for the photographs she needed to take. As she set up her equipment, Ethan wandered a few feet away, drawn to a small cluster of wildflowers that had somehow survived the harsh conditions. "Stay close," Melissa called out automatically, though she knew Ethan rarely responded to verbal commands. She focused her lens on a distant herd of elephants, losing herself in the familiar rhythm of her work. Time slipped away as she moved from spot to spot, capturing the changing light, the dance of shadows, the majesty of the wildlife. It wasn't until the sun began to dip toward the horizon that a cold realization washed over her. Ethan was gone. Panic flooded her system as she scanned the surroundings, calling his name despite knowing he might not answer. She ran back to the car, thinking maybe he had returned there, but the vehicle stood empty and silent. Her heart pounding, Melissa began to search the area, her calls becoming more frantic with each passing minute. How long had she been lost in her photography? How far could a 7-year-old boy have wandered in that time? As darkness began to fall, Melissa's fear gave way to a terrible, shameful thought. What if she didn't find him? What if this was the universe's way of giving her a clean slate? No more struggling to connect with a child who seemed to live in a different world. No more financial burden. No more sacrificed dreams. The thought horrified her, yet it lingered as she returned to the car, tears streaming down her face. She told herself she would drive to the nearest ranger station, alert the authorities, organize a search party. But as she started the engine, her movements were mechanical, detached. She drove away slowly, her eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, watching the spot where she had last seen her son grow smaller and smaller until it disappeared altogether. Miles away, Ethan Parker walked alone through the savannah, his small feet sinking into the dry earth. Unlike most children who would be terrified in such a situation, Ethan's unique perception of the world kept him moving forward, drawn by the distant sound of a river. His internal world, rich in patterns and repetitions, didn't fully process the abandonment. He didn't cry or call out for his mother. Instead, he continued his solitary journey, occasionally stopping to examine interesting rocks or insects that caught his attention. As night fell completely, the savannah transformed. The heat of the day gave way to a surprising chill, and the sounds changed from the buzz of insects to the more ominous calls of nocturnal predators. Glowing eyes appeared in the darkness, watching the vulnerable boy from a distance. A pack of hyenas began to circle, their eerie laughter echoing across the plain as they closed in on their potential prey. Ethan sat down on the ground, hugging his knees to his chest. His face remained calm, even as the hyenas drew closer, their hunger making them bold. But before they could attack, a deafening roar shattered the night. A massive lion emerged from the shadows, its powerful silhouette outlined by the moonlight. The hyenas hesitated, then scattered, leaving nothing but dust in their wake. Ethan showed no fear as the lion approached. His perception of danger was different from most people's, and instead of seeing a predator, he saw only the beautiful pattern of the lion's mane and the graceful movement of its muscles. Slowly, the majestic animal lay down beside him, as if standing guard. The boy reached out with curious fingers, touching the lion's mane, feeling the texture between his fingertips. An inexplicable connection was born in that moment, something that transcended the natural order of things. At dawn, James Wilson, a seasoned ranger, at the Masai Mara National Reserve, noticed unusual tracks during his morning patrol. Small human footprints surrounded by the massive paw prints of a male lion. His heart sank, assuming the worst. He immediately radioed his colleague, Dr. Sarah Thompson, a wildlife biologist who had been studying the lion populations in the reserve for the past 5 years. "I've found tracks," he reported grimly. "A child and a lion heading toward the eastern sector. I'm following them now." Sarah met him halfway, her face tense with concern. Together they followed the trail, prepared for a tragic discovery. What they found instead left them speechless. There, beneath the shade of a lone acacia tree, lay Ethan, alive and unharmed, leaning against the sleeping form of a magnificent male lion. The animal, known to the rangers as Jabari, one of the oldest and most feared predators in the reserve, had his massive body curled protectively around the boy. "Don't move," Sarah whispered, her hand automatically reaching for the tranquilizer, a gun strapped to her belt. But when she tried to step closer, Jabari lifted his head and let out a warning growl that made both rangers freeze in their tracks. "I've never seen anything like this," James murmured, his voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. "That lion should have—" He couldn't bring himself to finish the sentence. Sarah studied the scene, her scientific mind racing to make sense of what she was seeing. "We need to get the boy out of there, but we can't approach without risking both their lives." They retreated to a safe distance to call for backup and formulate a plan. News of the extraordinary situation spread quickly through the reserve's communication channels, reaching the headquarters where Tyler Brooks, the American director of the reserve, was reviewing monthly reports. "A boy and a lion?" Tyler repeated, incredulously. "Are you sure, Wilson?" "Seeing it with my own eyes, sir," James confirmed. "The lion is protecting him, not harming him, but we can't get close enough to rescue the child." Tyler ran a hand through his graying hair, thinking rapidly. "I'm on my way. Contact the nearest hospital and alert the child welfare services and keep the media out of this for now. The last thing we need is a circus." But it was already too late for that. A tourist on a morning safari had spotted the rangers and, curious about the commotion, had used a telephoto lens to capture images of the incredible scene. By midday, the first photographs were already circulating on social media, captioned with variations of "Miracle in the Mara," "Lion Guard's Lost Child." The story was about to explode onto the world stage, forever changing the lives of everyone involved, especially Melissa Parker, who was just checking into a hotel in Nairobi, her camera bag heavy with photographs, but her heart heavier with the secret she carried. As she scrolled through her phone, a news alert caught her eye. The image on the screen made her knees buckle. Her son, her Ethan, alive and in the company of a creature that should have been his end, but had somehow become his protector. The weight of what she had done crashed down upon her with the force of an avalanche, leaving her gasping for breath in the middle of the hotel lobby. She had abandoned her child to die, and now the whole world was witnessing a miracle that should never have had to happen. With shaking hands, she booked a return journey to the Masai Mara, knowing that she would have to face not only her son, but also the consequences of her unforgivable choice. The news spread like wildfire across continents and time zones. By nightfall, the image of Ethan and Jabari had been shared millions of times, captivating the imagination of people around the globe. Everyone wanted to know more about the boy who had tamed a lion, the child who seemed to possess some mysterious connection to one of nature's most fearsome predators. At the Masai Mara headquarters, Tyler Brooks paced back and forth in his office, fielding calls from journalists, government officials, and curious colleagues. A former zoologist with 20 years of experience studying big cats, Tyler had never encountered anything like this in all his research. "No, we haven't separated them yet," he explained for what felt like the 100th time. "Any attempt to approach triggers a protective response from the lion. We're consulting with experts to determine the safest course of action." After hanging up, he turned to Sarah Thompson, who was reviewing footage captured by long-range cameras they had set up to monitor the unusual pair. "What do you make of this, Dr. Thompson?" Tyler asked, rubbing his tired eyes. Sarah replayed a clip showing Ethan running his fingers through Jabari's mane, completely at ease. "It defies everything we know about lion behavior," she admitted. "Jabari is a solitary male, known for his aggression toward other lions and humans alike. Yet with this child," she shook her head in wonder. "Could it be the boy's condition?" Tyler suggested. "I've been reading about autism since we identified him. Some research indicates that certain animals respond differently to people on the spectrum. Therapy dogs, horses, dolphins. But a wild lion, it's unprecedented." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. James Wilson entered, his face grim. "She's here," he announced. Melissa Parker stood in the reception area, her body rigid with tension and guilt. The 36-hour journey back to the Masai Mara had given her plenty of time to construct explanations and excuses, none of which seemed adequate now that she was about to face the consequences of her actions. Tyler approached her with professional courtesy that barely masked his disapproval. "Ms. Parker, I'm Tyler Brooks, Director of the Reserve. We have a lot to discuss." In a small conference room, Melissa sat across from Tyler, Sarah, and a representative from Kenyan Child Welfare Services, a stern-faced woman named Gloria Kimani. "According to your statement to the authorities, you were separated from your son during a photography expedition," Gloria recounted, her tone making it clear she didn't entirely believe this version of events. "You claim you searched for hours before driving to get help." Melissa nodded mechanically, the lie bitter on her tongue. She had prepared for accusations, for anger, but nothing had prepared her for the cold reality of what she had done, now reflected back at her through the eyes of these strangers. "Ms. Parker," Tyler interjected, his voice softer but no less probing. "I've worked with many parents over the years. I know the strain of raising a child with special needs. If there's more to the story—" "I want to see my son," Melissa interrupted, unable to bear the scrutiny any longer. "Please, I just need to see that he's okay." Sarah exchanged glances with Tyler before responding. "That's complicated. We can take you to observe from a distance, but approaching Ethan might agitate the lion. We're still developing a strategy to safely separate them." Melissa felt a fresh wave of shame wash over her. Her abandonment had thrust Ethan into a situation so bizarre that even professionals couldn't safely reach him. "How has he survived out there?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's the most remarkable part," Sarah explained, her scientific curiosity momentarily overriding her judgment of Melissa. "Jabari appears to be hunting for both of them. We've observed him bringing back kills and allowing Ethan to eat first. He's guarding him during the night and guiding him to water sources during the day. It's as if he's adopted him." The implications of this statement hung in the air. A wild animal was providing the care and protection that Melissa had failed to give. As promised, they took her to a viewing platform several hundred yards from where Ethan and Jabari had established their unusual routine. Through powerful binoculars, Melissa watched her son moving with surprising confidence alongside the massive predator. Ethan's clothes were dirty and torn, but he seemed unharmed, even content. "Ethan," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "My baby." The reality of the situation began to sink in. Even if they managed to rescue Ethan, what then? Child services would investigate. There would be questions she couldn't answer, consequences she couldn't escape. And beyond the legal ramifications, there was the deeper question of whether she deserved to have her son back at all. Meanwhile, unaware of his mother's return, Ethan continued his extraordinary existence alongside Jabari. Their days followed a simple pattern. They would wake at dawn and walk to a nearby stream where both would drink. Jabari would then leave Ethan in a safe spot, usually beneath a tree or on a rock formation, while he hunted. Upon his return, they would share the meal, with the lion seemingly careful not to frighten the boy with the more gruesome aspects of predatory life. Researchers observing from a distance were astounded by the level of apparent communication between the two. Ethan, who had rarely spoken more than a few words at home, could be seen making gestures that the lion seemed to understand. When Ethan flapped his hands, a common self-stimulatory behavior in children with autism, Jabari would remain perfectly still, as if recognizing the need for calm. When the boy tapped his chest, the lion would come closer, allowing Ethan to nestle against his mane for comfort or warmth. Dr. Rachel Anderson, a renowned expert in animal behavior who had flown in from Chicago at Tyler's request, spent hours documenting these interactions. What we're witnessing here challenges our fundamental understanding of both feline psychology and human-animal connections, she explained to an assembled team of researchers and reserve staff. Lions, particularly males, are not known for nurturing behaviors outside their pride, and certainly not toward humans. Yet Jabari is exhibiting classic caregiving patterns: protection, food sharing, physical comfort. The question is, why? Theories were debated and data collected. The situation was further complicated by the arrival of media personnel and curious onlookers. Despite the reserve's attempts to control access, the story had become too big to contain. News helicopters circled overhead, causing distress to the wildlife and threatening to disrupt the delicate balance between Ethan and Jabari. The influence of public opinion became another factor to consider. Hashtags like Ethan and Jabari and Lion Boy trended globally. The majority expressed wonder at the unlikely friendship, but there were also calls for immediate intervention to save the child from what they perceived as imminent danger. Conservation groups entered the fray as well, some arguing that Jabari should be left alone as an example of unexpected animal behavior, others concerned that his association with a human would forever alter his natural instincts and potentially endanger him if he began to see all humans as friendly. Amid this growing chaos, Tyler made a difficult decision. "We need to end this circus," he announced to his core team. "For the boy's sake, for the lion's sake, and for the integrity of the reserve, we're going to implement a rescue operation, but it needs to be done right." The plan they developed was multifaceted. First, they would establish a more consistent presence near Ethan and Jabari, gradually decreasing the distance day by day to acclimate the lion to human proximity. Simultaneously, they would introduce elements from Ethan's past: toys, clothing, with his scent, recordings of familiar sounds, to help the boy remember his human connections. "And what about me?" Melissa asked when the strategy was explained to her. "What's my role in all this?" Tyler hesitated before answering. "Ms. Parker, I'm going to be frank. Your presence complicates things. We don't fully understand why Jabari has bonded with Ethan, but we do know that any perceived threat to that bond could trigger aggression. Until we've gained more trust, you'll need to remain at a distance." The words struck Melissa like physical blows. She was being told that she, the mother, was a potential threat to her own child's safety. The worst part was she couldn't argue. She had forfeited her right to protest when she'd driven away from the Savanna, leaving Ethan behind. As the rescue plan was set in motion, an unexpected development occurred. Dr. Michael Reynolds, a specialist in childhood autism who had been following the story from his clinic in Boston, reached out to Tyler with an intriguing perspective. "I've been studying the footage available online," he explained during their video call. "The way Ethan interacts with the lion is remarkable, not just because it's a wild animal, but because of the level of engagement he's showing. Many children with severe autism struggle with social connection, yet he's formed a profound bond. With Jabari, this could provide valuable insights into alternative therapies for autism." Dr. Reynolds offered to fly to Kenya to assist with the reintegration process once Ethan was safely retrieved. "The transition will be challenging for him," he warned. "The structured, predictable relationship he's established with the lion has likely provided a sense of security that traditional human interactions often lack for children on the spectrum. Removing him from that without proper support could cause significant trauma." As preparations continued, the relationship between Ethan and Jabari continued to evolve in ways that fascinated the observing researchers. The lion, initially maintaining some distance even in his protective role, now allowed Ethan to sleep curled against his side at night. During the day, he seemed to be teaching the boy survival skills, showing him which plants to avoid, how to find shelter from the sun, where to locate water during the dry periods. "It's almost as if," Sarah observed to Tyler one evening, "Jabari recognizes something in Ethan that we don't. Some quality that transcends the usual boundaries between species." Tyler nodded thoughtfully. "Or perhaps it's simpler than that. Perhaps Jabari, like Ethan, experiences the world differently from others of his kind. Maybe they recognized a kindred spirit in each other." The possibility hung in the air between them, a reminder that despite all their scientific knowledge and careful observations, some connections remained, fundamentally mysterious. Bonds formed not through logic or reason, but through some deeper, more instinctive understanding that even the most sophisticated research might never fully explain. As dawn broke over the Masai Mara on the 10th day of Ethan's extraordinary coexistence with Jabari, the reserve had transformed into something resembling a small, makeshift village. Beyond the secured perimeter established by Tyler and his team, journalists from every major news outlet had set up camp, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like mechanical flowers seeking the sun. Scientists from universities across the globe had arrived, drawn by the unprecedented opportunity to study this remarkable bond between human and predator. Representatives from various wildlife organizations maintained a constant presence, their opinions about the situation as diverse as their backgrounds. And then there were the curious travelers who had cancelled their original plans and rerouted to Kenya upon hearing the story, hoping to catch a glimpse of what many were now calling the miracle of the Mara. Inside the command center, a repurposed research station now buzzing with activity, Tyler Brooks reviewed the latest footage with his expanded team. Dr. Rachel Anderson pointed to a particularly interesting sequence on one of the monitors. "Watch. Here," she instructed, her finger tracing the movement on the screen. "See how Jabari responds when Ethan begins rocking. He moves to block the boy's view of the herd of zebras that just appeared. My theory is that he's recognized a pattern. When Ethan gets overwhelmed by visual stimuli, he rocks more intensely. The lion is actively helping to manage the boy's sensory input." Dr. Michael Reynolds, who had arrived from Boston the previous day, leaned forward with interest. "Fascinating. Many children with autism experience sensory processing challenges. Bright colors, sudden movements, loud noises, all can trigger overwhelming responses. What you're describing suggests that Jabari has developed an intuitive understanding of Ethan's needs that many humans struggle to achieve. Sarah Thompson added, "We've also documented at least 7 instances where Jabari has adjusted his own behavior based on Ethan's reactions. Yesterday, when he brought down a gazelle, he deliberately moved the kill behind a cluster of bushes before allowing Ethan to approach for feeding. It's as if he's shielding the boy from aspects of predation that might be disturbing." Tyler nodded, thoughtfully, his gaze shifting to another screen, where a live feed showed Ethan and Jabari resting beneath the shade of an acacia tree. The boy was running his fingers through the lion's mane, an activity that seemed to calm both of them. "The question remains," he said. "How do we separate them without causing trauma to either one? Our window of opportunity is closing." The urgency wasn't just about Ethan's physical well-being, though that remained a primary concern. The Kenyan Wildlife Service had expressed increasing pressure to resolve the situation before it set a dangerous precedent for human-wildlife interaction. There were also growing complications from the media circus, with some outlets offering substantial sums to anyone who could get close enough for exclusive footage, creating potentially dangerous situations that stretched the reserve's security resources. And then there was the matter of Melissa Parker. Her presence at the reserve had not gone unnoticed by the press, and the story had begun to shift. Questions about how a 7-year-old boy with autism had ended up alone in the savannah were being asked with increasing frequency and skepticism. Gloria Kimani, the child welfare representative, had been conducting her own investigation, interviewing reserve staff and reviewing the timeline of events. That morning, she had requested a private meeting with Tyler. "Mr. Brooks," she began, her tone formal and grave, "based on the evidence I've gathered, I have serious concerns about Ms. Parker's account of how her son came to be separated from her. The timing doesn't align with her story of immediately seeking help. There's a gap of nearly 12 hours that she cannot satisfactorily explain." Tyler sighed, having suspected as much himself. "What are you suggesting, Ms. Kimani?" "I'm suggesting that upon Ethan's rescue, custody should be temporarily assigned to the state while a full investigation is conducted. I believe there is a strong possibility that this was not a simple case of getting separated during a photography expedition." The implications hung heavy in the air. If Gloria's suspicions were correct, Melissa could face criminal charges for child abandonment or endangerment. Tyler felt the weight of this additional complication, knowing it would further complicate the already delicate rescue operation. Outside the command center, unaware of this conversation, Melissa sat alone on a bench, watching the distant figures of her son and the lion through binoculars. The past 10 days had been a journey through her own personal hell, each moment forcing her to confront the monstrous nature of what she had done. The initial relief she had felt upon learning that Ethan was alive had given way to a complex mixture of gratitude, shame, and a dawning realization that her life would never be the same. Her phone buzzed with another call from her lawyer back in the States, but she ignored it. Legal consequences seemed almost irrelevant compared to the more fundamental question that had begun to haunt her. Even if she avoided prosecution, even if by some miracle she was allowed to retain custody of Ethan, would she ever deserve to be his mother again? A shadow fell across her, and she looked up to find James Wilson standing there, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Parker, Dr. Reynolds would like to speak with you about the rescue operation." Following James to a quieter section of the compound, Melissa found Dr. Reynolds reviewing notes at a small table beneath a canvas awning. He greeted her with professional courtesy that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Ms. Parker, thank you for joining me. Please sit down." He waited until she was seated before continuing. "I've been consulting with the team about the best approach. for reintegrating Ethan into human society once he's separated from Jabari. Given his condition, this transition will be particularly challenging. I need to understand more about his routines, preferences, and communication patterns before the separation occurs. Melissa nodded, grateful for the opportunity to contribute. Something positive. Of course, anything that might help. For the next hour, she shared details about Ethan, his favorite foods and textures, the songs that calmed him during meltdowns, the small collection of smooth stones he liked to carry in his pockets. As she spoke, Dr. Reynolds took careful notes, occasionally asking questions that revealed his deep understanding of autism spectrum disorders. "One last question, Ms. Parker," he said as their conversation wound down. "In your observation of Ethan's interaction with Jabari, have you noticed any behaviors or connections that seem familiar to you? Anything that reminds you of his interactions with people or other animals before this incident?" Melissa considered the question, thinking back to the limited footage she had been allowed to see. "There's something about the way he touches the lion's mane," she said slowly. "It reminds me of how he used to sit with our neighbor's therapy dog. He would spend hours just running his fingers through its fur, completely content." The therapist said it was a form of sensory stimulation that helped regulate his nervous system. Dr. Reynolds nodded, making a final note. "That's helpful, thank you. Sensory-seeking behaviors are common in children with autism, and it seems Ethan has found a powerful source of tactile comfort with Jabari. We'll need to provide suitable alternatives once they're separated." The word separated hung in the air, heavy with implication. Despite the necessity of the rescue, there was something profoundly sad about the prospect of ending the extraordinary relationship that had developed between boy and lion. "What will happen to Jabari?" Melissa asked suddenly. "After..." Dr. Reynolds hesitated. "That's primarily a question for the wildlife experts, but from what I understand, there are concerns about his reintegration into the wild population. His behavior has been so atypical that there are questions about whether he can return to normal predatory patterns. There's been talk of relocating him to a protected reserve where he can be monitored." The idea that both Ethan and Jabari might face uncertain futures as a result of her actions added another layer to Melissa's growing mountain of guilt. Before she could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of the command center. People were running, shouting instructions, and the atmosphere suddenly charged with urgency. James appeared again, his face tense. "We need to move. There's been a development." At the command center, Tyler was coordinating what appeared to be an emergency response. "Teams 2 and 3, maintain position, but be prepared to move in on my signal. Medical units stand by for potential deployment." Melissa pushed her way forward. "What's happening? Is Ethan okay?" Sarah Thompson, who was monitoring the live feed, answered without taking her eyes off the screen. "A tourist vehicle broke through the perimeter. They're approaching Ethan and Jabari's location, presumably trying to get closer footage. Jabari has already noticed them and is showing signs of agitation." The monitors displayed a terrifying tableau. A white SUV with the logo of a safari company had stopped about 50 yards from where Ethan and Jabari had been resting. The lion was now on his feet, his body language shifting from relaxed to alert, his tail swishing in a warning pattern that experienced observers recognized as a prelude to aggression. "If those idiots get any closer," Tyler muttered, then keyed his radio. "James, what's your ETA to intercept?" 3 minutes, came the crackled response. "But they're already too close, sir. If Jabari charges..." "He won't," Dr. Anderson interjected, studying the lion's behavior. "Look at how he's positioning himself between the vehicle and Ethan. He's not in hunting mode, he's in protection mode. As long as they don't approach the boy directly, he'll likely maintain a defensive posture rather than attacking." But her analysis, while reassuring in one sense, highlighted another concern. If Jabari's protective instincts were triggered, it might make their planned rescue approach even more difficult. The trust they had been slowly building through careful, gradual exposure could be shattered by this reckless intrusion. On the screen, the situation continued to unfold. The safari vehicle had stopped advancing, perhaps finally recognizing the danger, but it was still much too close for comfort. Jabari stood his ground, his massive body a living shield between the potential threat and the boy, who seemed remarkably unconcerned by the commotion. "What's Ethan doing?" Melissa asked, straining to see the smaller figure partially obscured by the lion. Dr. Reynolds leaned closer to the monitor. "It looks like he's signing to the lion." Indeed, Ethan was making deliberate gestures with his hands, movements that seemed too specific to be random. With growing astonishment, the observers watched as Jabari responded, his posture gradually relaxing, though he remained vigilant. "He's communicating with him," Sarah breathed. "Actually communicating." Dr. Reynolds turned to Melissa. "Did Ethan know sign language before this happened?" She shook her head, equally amazed. "We tried to teach him some basic signs, but he never showed much interest. His therapist said his motor planning difficulties made it challenging." "Then he's developed his own system with Jabari," Dr. Reynolds concluded, "a private language between them. This is remarkable." The immediate crisis was averted when James and his team intercepted the safari vehicle, firmly escorting it away from the restricted area. But the incident had revealed something important about the bond between Ethan and Jabari, something that would need to be factored into their rescue strategy. As the team regrouped to discuss the implications, Tyler pulled Melissa aside. "Ms. Parker, there's something you should know. Child Welfare Services has raised concerns about your account of events. Once Ethan is safely retrieved, there will be a formal investigation into the circumstances that led to him being alone in the Savanna." Melissa felt as if the ground was shifting beneath her feet. The moment she had been dreading had arrived. Soon everyone would know what she had done, or rather, what she had failed to do. The thought of facing public scrutiny, legal consequences, and most of all, her son's potential realization that his mother had abandoned him was almost unbearable. "I understand," she managed to say, her voice hollow. Tyler studied her face, his expression a mixture of compassion and judgment. "For what it's worth, I believe people can change, Ms. Parker. I've seen it happen. Whatever mistakes you've made, whatever led to this situation, it doesn't have to define the rest of your life or your relationship with your son." His words, meant to offer some measure of comfort, only underscored the enormity of the road ahead. As Melissa watched the continuing footage of Ethan and Jabari, now settling back into their interrupted routine, she wondered if redemption was possible for someone who had committed such a profound betrayal of trust. And if it was, what form would it take in a world forever altered by the unlikely bond between a boy and a lion? The morning of the planned rescue dawned with an eerie stillness over the Masai Mara. After 2 weeks of careful preparation and gradual conditioning, today would be the day they would attempt to safely separate Ethan from Jabari. The operation had been meticulously designed, with input from wildlife experts, medical professionals, and specialists in childhood autism, all coordinated under Tyler's steady leadership. Dr. Michael Reynolds made a final adjustment to the specialized sensory kit he had prepared for Ethan: a weighted blanket, noise-canceling headphones, and a collection of textured objects similar to the ones Melissa had described as being soothing to her son. "Remember," he instructed the medical team, "minimize verbal communication. Use simple gestures and give him plenty of space. Our goal is to make this transition as non-traumatic as possible." Nearby, Dr. Rachel Anderson, was briefing the wildlife management team about Jabari's expected responses. Based on the patterns we've observed, he's most relaxed in the mid-morning after feeding. That's our optimal window. We'll use the tranquilizer only as an absolute last resort, not only because of the physical risks to the lion, but because witnessing Jabari in distress could trigger a severe reaction in Ethan. Tyler gathered the core team for a final review of the plan. We've established consistent human presence at increasing proximity over the past week, he reminded them. Both Ethan and Jabari have shown decreasing signs of agitation with each controlled approach. Today, Dr. Reynolds will be the primary contact, with Sarah providing wildlife expertise if needed. The rest of you know your positions. Remember, safety first. The boys, the lions, and your own. Melissa stood at the edge of the gathering, her presence barely tolerated by some team members who had drawn their own conclusions about her role in Ethan's abandonment. Tyler had insisted she remain at the base camp during the operation, a decision she hadn't contested. She understood that her sudden appearance could disrupt the delicate equilibrium they had worked so hard to establish. "Good luck," she whispered as the teams dispersed to their assigned positions. No one acknowledged her words. The rescue vehicles moved out in carefully choreographed sequence, maintaining radio silence except for essential communications. From her position at the monitoring station, Melissa watched the live feed with Gloria Kimani beside her. The child welfare representative's presence was both a professional necessity and a pointed reminder of the investigation that awaited. On the screens, they could see Ethan and Jabari in what had become their usual morning spot, a small clearing near a waterhole where several flat rocks caught the early sun. The boy was sitting cross-legged, seemingly absorbed in arranging small pebbles in patterns, while the lion dozed nearby, his massive body relaxed, but his ears occasionally twitching, alert to any potential threats. Dr. Reynolds' vehicle stopped at the predetermined distance, and he exited alone, carrying a small backpack containing the sensory kit. His movements were slow and deliberate as he began the approach they had rehearsed countless times. "Look at Jabari," Gloria murmured, her professional detachment momentarily giving way to awe. "He's watching, but he's not aggressive." Indeed, the lion had raised his head to observe the approaching human, but showed none of the warning signs they had catalogued as danger signals. Instead, he seemed almost expectant, as if recognizing a pattern from the graduated approaches of previous days. Dr. Reynolds stopped at the established safe distance and crouched down, making himself smaller and less threatening. From his backpack, he removed a small portable speaker and pressed play. The gentle melody that began to drift across the clearing was one that Melissa had identified as Ethan's favorite, a simple piano piece that had once reliably calmed him during overwhelming moments. The effect was immediate and visible. Ethan looked up from his pebbles, his head tilting slightly in the way it always did when something captured his interest. Dr. Reynolds remained perfectly still, allowing the music to work its subtle magic, creating a bridge between the boy's past and present worlds. After nearly 10 minutes of this careful acclimation, Reynolds took the next step, removing a soft, blue blanket from his pack, identical to the one Ethan had been attached to before the incident. He placed it on the ground between himself and the boy, then retreated several steps. The moment of truth had arrived. Would Ethan remember? Would he make the connection? And most crucially, would Jabari allow him to approach this human offering? Time seemed to stretch as Ethan stared at the blanket, his expression unreadable. Then, with the unpredictability that often characterized his actions, he stood and walked directly to the blanket. He picked it up, rubbing the fabric between his fingers in a familiar, self-soothing gesture, before turning to look at Jabari. What happened next left even the most experienced observers breathless. Ethan made several of the hand gestures they had seen him use with the lion, then pointed to Dr. Reynolds. Jabari rose to his feet, his eyes never leaving the boy, and padded forward until he stood directly beside him. "He's introducing them," Sarah whispered into her radio from her observation position. "It's like he's giving permission for contact." Dr. Reynolds, to his credit, maintained his calm, professional demeanor despite being mere feet away from a full-grown male lion. Following the carefully developed protocol, he slowly extended his hand, palm down, in a non-threatening gesture. Ethan watched this interaction with intense focus, then reached out and took Dr. Reynolds' hand. It was the breakthrough they had been hoping for, the first voluntary human contact since his time with Jabari began. The next phase was the most delicate. Dr. Reynolds needed to guide Ethan back to the vehicle while ensuring that Jabari didn't perceive this as a threat or abduction. Slowly, he began to walk backward, still holding the boy's hand, maintaining eye contact with the lion. Jabari followed, his powerful body moving with fluid grace, escorting them rather than preventing their progress. The radio channels remained silent, everyone holding their breath as the unlikely trio made their way toward the waiting vehicle. When they reached it, Dr. Reynolds opened the rear door, revealing the interior that had been specially prepared to accommodate Ethan's sensory needs: dimmed lighting, soft textures, minimal equipment. Ethan peered inside curiously, still clutching his recovered blanket. The critical moment arrived. Would he enter willingly? And if he did, how would Jabari react to this final separation? Ethan turned once more to the lion, his small hand reaching out to touch the magnificent mane one last time. The gesture held such poignancy that several observers later admitted to fighting back tears. Then, with surprising decisiveness, he climbed into the vehicle. Jabari remained beside the open door, his golden eyes fixed on the boy. Dr. Reynolds, following his intuition rather than the strict protocol, waited rather than immediately closing the door. He sensed that this farewell needed to unfold in its own way, at its own pace. For nearly 5 minutes, boy and lion simply gazed at each other, a silent communication passing between them that no human observer could fully comprehend. Then Jabari did something extraordinary. He lowered his massive head and pressed it briefly against the edge of the vehicle, a gesture almost like a blessing before stepping back and sitting on his haunches. Dr. Reynolds gently closed the door, and the vehicle began its slow journey back to base camp, followed at a distance by the support teams. Jabari watched until they disappeared from view, then returned to the rock where he and Ethan had spent so many hours together. Sarah, monitoring from her position, reported with wonder, "He's not following, he's letting him go." At the base camp, preparations for Ethan's arrival were already underway. A quiet space had been set up with medical equipment discreetly hidden, and Dr. Patricia Winters, a pediatric specialist, waited to conduct a thorough examination once the boy was settled. Melissa stood apart from the activity, her heart pounding with anticipation and fear. What would happen when Ethan saw her? Would he recognize her, reject her, or worst of all, show no reaction at all, as if she were a stranger? The vehicle arrived to a collectively held breath. Dr. Reynolds emerged first, his face displaying cautious optimism. "He's calm," he reported to the waiting team. "The transition has gone more smoothly than we dared hope. But remember, no sudden movements, no loud noises. His sensory processing is likely to be especially fragile right now." Ethan appeared in the doorway, still clutching his blue blanket, his eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings with wary curiosity. Dr. Reynolds remained beside him, a steadying presence in this overwhelming new environment. "Ethan," Melissa whispered, unable to stop herself from taking a step forward. The boy's gaze found her, and for a heartbreaking moment, his expression showed no recognition. Then his eyes widened slightly, and he tilted his head, that same characteristic gesture of interest. He didn't run to her, didn't show the emotional reunion that might have occurred with another child. But he didn't turn away either. Dr. Reynolds looked between mother and son, then gently guided Ethan toward Melissa. "He's processing," he explained quietly. "Give him time." As they approached, Melissa knelt down to be at her son's eye level, fighting to keep her emotions under control. She knew that her own distress could trigger his, making an already difficult transition even more challenging. "Hi, Ethan," she said softly. "I've missed you." Ethan studied her face with the intense focus he sometimes brought to things that fascinated him. Then, in a moment that Melissa would forever remember as a gift she didn't deserve, he reached out and touched her cheek. A brief contact, but unmistakably intentional. The medical assessment confirmed what seemed almost miraculous. Despite his 2 weeks in the wild, Ethan was in relatively good health. He was dehydrated and had lost some weight, but showed no signs of injury or illness. More surprising was his behavior. Dr. Winters, who had reviewed his medical history, noted that his eye contact had improved, and he seemed more responsive to environmental cues than his previous evaluations had indicated. It's as if his time with Jabari somehow, I don't want to say improved his autism, because that's not how it works, she explained to the team. But the experience seems to have opened new neural pathways for him. The constant sensory input of the Savanna, the need to communicate with the lion, the structured routine they developed, all of it provided a unique form of therapy that we couldn't have designed if we tried. As Ethan settled into the temporary accommodation prepared for him, attention turned to the other half of the extraordinary partnership. Jabari remained in his territory, behaving much as he had before meeting Ethan, though observers noted he would occasionally return to the rock where they had spent time together. The question of his future became a topic of heated debate. Some argued he should be left to return to his natural patterns, while others pointed out that his unusual behavior might make him vulnerable in encounters with other lions or humans who expected typical aggression. Tyler ultimately proposed a compromise. "We'll designate his current territory as a special conservation zone," he announced at a meeting of stakeholders. "Limited tourism, increased monitoring, and a buffer between him and the more trafficked areas of the reserve. If he shows signs of distress or dangerous behavior changes, we'll reevaluate." Meanwhile, the legal and personal aftermath for Melissa unfolded with painful inevitability. She had finally admitted the truth, not just to the authorities, but to herself. The charges were serious: child endangerment and abandonment. Her attorney advised that she would likely face jail time, even with a plea agreement. The most difficult confession came when she sat down with Gloria Kimani and explained exactly what had happened that day. The mounting frustration, the moment of terrible decision, the drive away from her abandoned child. "I don't have an excuse," she concluded, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "I failed him in the worst possible way. Whatever punishment comes, I deserve it." Gloria's expression remained professionally neutral, but her voice softened slightly. "What matters now is what's best for Ethan. He'll need specialized care, stability, and people who understand his unique needs." "I know I've lost the right to be his mother," Melissa acknowledged, "but I want to be part of his life, in whatever way is healthy for him. I'll do whatever it takes. Therapy, parenting classes, supervision. I just don't want him to think I didn't come back for him." The legal proceedings moved forward, resulting in a sentence that reflected both the severity of Melissa's actions and mitigating factors like her voluntary confession and clear remorse. She would serve 18 months in prison, followed by extensive probation and mandatory counseling. Custody of Ethan was temporarily assigned to his maternal aunt, Rebecca Parker, a special education teacher from Minneapolis who had immediately flown to Kenya when she learned what had happened. Before beginning her sentence, Melissa was granted A supervised visit with Ethan. Rebecca brought him to the meeting, which took place in a quiet room designed to minimize sensory overload. Dr. Reynolds was present to monitor Ethan's responses and intervene if necessary. "I've brought something for you," Melissa told her son, presenting a carefully chosen gift, a plush lion, meticulously selected to have a mane texture similar to Jabari's. Ethan accepted the toy, his fingers immediately finding their way into the soft mane. He didn't speak. His verbal communication remained limited, but he sat beside Melissa for nearly an hour, occasionally making the hand gestures he had used with Jabari. "He's showing you his language," Dr. Reynolds explained. "It's a significant sign of trust." Over the following months, as Melissa began serving her sentence, an unexpected development occurred. Dr. Reynolds, who had remained in Kenya to continue studying the footage and data from Ethan's time with Jabari, made a breakthrough in understanding the communication system the boy had developed. "It's not exactly sign language," he explained to Rebecca during one of their regular video calls. "It's more like a mutual adaptation." Ethan observed Jabari's natural body language and began mimicking it, while simultaneously creating his own gestures that the lion learned to recognize. They essentially met in the middle, creating a shared communication system. This discovery led to an innovative approach to Ethan's therapy. Instead of trying to force him into traditional communication patterns, his new therapists began by learning his gestures, then gradually expanding from that foundation. The results were promising: increased engagement, reduced frustration, and small but significant improvements in verbal communication. As for Jabari, he adjusted to life without his human companion, though researchers continued to observe behaviors that set him apart from typical male lions. He seemed more tolerant of humans at a distance, less aggressive toward other animals when not hunting, and displayed what Dr. Anderson described as an unusual level of environmental awareness. 6 months after the separation, Rebecca made an extraordinary request. She asked to bring Ethan back to the Masai Mara for a supervised visit to see Jabari from a safe distance. After much consideration and planning, Tyler approved the visit with strict safety protocols in place. On a clear morning, Ethan stood on an observation platform, his aunt beside him, watching as Jabari patrolled his territory. The lions seemed to sense their presence, pausing to look directly at the platform. Though they were too far apart for physical contact, the connection between them remained palpable, a silent acknowledgement passing between boy and beast. "Thank you," Rebecca whispered to Tyler as they watched this reunion. "This means more to him than you can imagine." Tyler nodded, his gaze shifting between the boy and the lion. "Some connections transcend our understanding," he said, "and sometimes what looks like an ending is really just a transformation." 18 months later, as Melissa completed her sentence, the story of Ethan and Jabari had evolved from a global sensation to a case study revolutionizing approaches to both wildlife conservation and autism therapy. The research inspired by their bond had led to new therapeutic techniques being implemented around the world, with promising results for children who, like Ethan, experienced the world differently. Melissa emerged from prison changed, humbled, certainly, but also more self-aware and determined to earn a place in her son's life. She had used her time to educate herself about autism, completing online courses and reading everything she could find on sensory processing and alternative communication methods. Her reunion with Ethan, now 9 years old, took place at Rebecca's home in Minneapolis. In the 2 years since their separation in Kenya, he had made remarkable progress. Though still autistic, he had developed a functional communication system combining his unique gestures with some verbal language and tablet-based tools. He attended a specialized school where his teachers had been trained in the Jabari method, as Ethan's approach to communication had come to be called. "He knows you're coming," Rebecca told Melissa the night before. "We've been preparing him with pictures and stories. He understands that you made a mistake, that you were sick in your thinking, but that you've been working hard to get better." When the moment finally arrived, Melissa entered the living room to find Ethan sitting cross-legged on the floor, arranging small figurines in a pattern that resembled the rocks and trees of the savannah. He looked up at her entrance, his expression serious but not fearful. "Hello, Ethan," she said softly. "It's so good to see you." He studied her for a long moment, then made a gesture, hand to heart, then extended toward her. Dr. Reynolds, who had continued working with Ethan and was present for this important transition, translated, "That means he recognizes you as family." Melissa couldn't stop the tears that sprang to her eyes, though she tried to maintain the calm demeanor that Ethan needed. "I'm learning your language," she told him, carefully repeating the gesture back to him. "And I hope you'll help me get better at it." Over the following weeks, mother and son began the slow, careful process of rebuilding their relationship. There were difficult moments, times when Ethan withdrew, overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't fully process or express. But there were also breakthroughs, like the evening he spontaneously took Melissa's hand to show her his collection of textured objects, or the morning he used his tablet to ask her a question about Jabari. The journey toward healing wasn't just Melissa's. The experience had transformed everyone it touched. Rebecca had discovered a calling in advocating for children with special needs. Dr. Reynolds had revolutionized his approach to autism therapy. Tyler had implemented new protocols for human-wildlife interactions based on the lessons learned from Ethan and Jabari. And in a distant corner of the Masai Mara, Jabari continued his solitary existence, occasionally accepting the presence of researchers at a respectful distance. Every year, on the anniversary of Ethan's rescue, Tyler would send an update and photos to the Parker family, maintaining the connection between the boy and the lion, who had saved him in more ways than one. On Ethan's 10th birthday, a special package arrived from Kenya. Inside was a framed photograph of Jabari, along with a small vial of soil from the spot where boy and lion had formed their extraordinary bond. Accompanying these was a note from Tyler. "Some connections never break, even across oceans and species. Jabari remembers. We all do." That night, as Melissa helped Ethan get ready for bed, he showed her the lion figurine he kept on his nightstand, the one he had arranged each night in a protective circle around his other treasured objects. Using a combination of gestures and his tablet, he explained something that left her breathless with the beauty and wisdom of it. "Lion taught me to be brave," the tablet's mechanical voice translated. "Now I teach you." In that moment, Melissa understood that redemption wasn't something granted in a single dramatic gesture, but earned through daily choices, consistent effort, and humble acceptance of a new reality. Her son, her extraordinary, differently abled, profoundly wise son, was offering her the most precious gift, the chance to learn from him, just as he had learned from a lion in the wilds of Africa. And somewhere under the same sky, Jabari kept watch over his territory, his golden eyes reflecting the same stars that shone down on a boy who had once shared his world, a boy who carried the spirit of the lion within him wherever he went. Dear listeners, we hope that Ethan and Jabari's extraordinary journey has touched your heart. The bond between a boy and a lion reminds us that connections can form in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes our greatest growth comes from our most difficult challenges. For more emotionally powerful stories like this one, we've created a special playlist that explores the complexity of human relationships and the healing power of unconventional connections. Find it by clicking to your left. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day, we bring you unique narratives that explore the depth and wonder of life's most profound experiences. Don't miss our upcoming content, and please share your thoughts with us in the comments. What unexpected connection has changed your life?